So we're now going to move on to Glyscend. We're going to be joined by Ashish Nimgaonkar. I'm sorry, Ashish, for messing that up. Perhaps you might be able to correct me when you join us. Are you ready with your slides?
Well, thanks for the opportunity. I want to shift gears from looking at mitochondria to looking inside the gut. And I hope that my presentation is part storytelling about Glyscend and part provocative for us to start looking and thinking about new ways of addressing these chronic debilitating conditions. And at Glyscend, our hope and goal is to understand and recapitulate the remarkable efficacy of gastric bypass surgery on metabolic regulation. And the gastric bypass effects go above and beyond metabolic regulation, right? And what's pertinent to this conference is its effects on aging and longevity. And an article was published yesterday in New England Journal of Medicine where they looked at effects of gastric bypass on longevity, and it was remarkable that it extended the lifespan in patients who were obese, who had undergone gastric bypass. So we are learning about the effects of gastric bypass surgery on pretty much on a daily basis. And I've come to this problem as I'm a trained gastroenterologist and hepatologist. So for me, the GI tract is the most important organ in the body. But I am a strong subscriber to this notion that all disease begins in the gut. And even when we look at how diabetes is managed currently, we are really looking at glucose control with all the existing therapies and not necessarily addressing the root cause of what the drivers of diabetes and metabolic dysregulation are. And one of the most fascinating things that we have learned from the gut is through all the scientific and clinical evidence that we have now from gastric bypass surgery. Specifically, Roux-en-Y gastric bypass is a kind of gastric bypass surgery where there is rerouting of the intestines in addition to shrinking the size of the stomach. And for many decades, gastric bypass surgery used to be commonly applied for weight loss, but now it's part of the treatment algorithm for type 2 diabetes. And the reason is we've learned that patients who undergo gastric bypass surgery, within 24 to 48 hours, they have normalization of their blood glucose, and some of them even go off insulin without having lost an ounce of weight. And what we have learned is there is a key portion of the gut, the first portion of the small intestine right after the stomach, which is called the duodenum, which is instrumental in some aspects of metabolic regulation because it is the gatekeeper for how the signaling happens between the pancreas, the liver, and the brain. And this has also been sort of proven out and validated by other targeted device-based approaches. For example, an endobarrier, which is a endoscopic device that is placed in the small intestine. It's a plastic sleeve, essentially, and it interferes with this signaling that happens in the first portion of the small intestine. And so where does this fall in terms of how we can use the insights from gastric bypass surgery for treatment of metabolic disorders and type 2 diabetes? And if you look at how the traditional drugs work, they are very effective at glucose metabolism, reducing the blood glucose levels. But over a period of time, they become ineffective, and these patients oftentimes end up going on to insulin. But what we have learned from gastric bypass surgery is it not only affects blood glucose, but also there is this element of beta cell rescue that many of these patients can come off insulin. And if the bariatric surgery, gastric bypass surgery is done early on in the disease process, these patients actually can prevent from going into insulin. And there is a significant amount of beta cell rescue. And so many years back, we looked at this problem in a very solution agnostic way, and we took a very reductionist approach in that we knew that there is a portion of the gut which is instrumental, and could we recreate the same effects but through a pill? And what we came up with we have been working on this for the past 4 or 5 years, and now we have a compound that can be packed in a pill, is taken preprandially, and it's essentially a polymeric material which is in solution when it goes into the stomach, but when it hits the duodenum with pH activation, it essentially creates a barrier. And the beauty of the compound is that it's completely inert, it's non-absorbable, and it gets excreted within 24 hours. And this is a cartoon of how the core technology works. The polymer interacts with the mucus, which is a glycoprotein, which is lined throughout the GI tract. But once the polymer sees the mucus at a certain pH, it creates this sort of impermeable gel-like composition on top of the epithelium. And essentially what we are doing is enhancing the natural barrier properties of the gut, of the GI tract. And mucus is a natural barrier, but you can imagine that it has holes. And what we are doing with our material is plugging those holes. And so it fundamentally goes to this core hypothesis that many of the diseases in our body, including metabolic diseases, are facilitated by leaky gut. So what we are doing here is correcting the leaky gut physiology. And for the past many years, we have essentially invented this polymer discovery platform. And now we have created a robust engine where we have tested more than 300 candidates. And we are now advancing one candidate into the clinic next year. We are about to initiate our phase 1 trials in Q2 of 2021. And I think one important consideration here is that many people may not know, but polymeric drugs have been around for many decades. And some of the blockbusters, including Renagel, Renvela, Velcol, they're all polymeric drugs. So there's a lot of institutional knowledge that we have within the company, having worked at the intersection of GI physiology and polymeric drugs, that we are bringing to bear to address this important problem. Another important attribute for our program is the non-absorbability of the compounds. And because this becomes very important because many of the drugs in this space have had issues from chronic systemic exposure and effects on end organs and other systemic side effects. And we don't have to deal with those problems, obviously. But also, given the way the compound works, it's totally inert and there is no metabolism and there's no metabolic breakdown. It does not interfere with the normal milieu and physiology of the GI tract. We've also tested this in multiple preclinical animal models, and we have demonstrated that in addition to the regular sort of signals that we look for, glycemic improvement and weight loss, we've also demonstrated improvement in insulin resistance. But more importantly, there's early signs that we might be affecting the beta cell health in the pancreas. So we've been very fortunate so far in terms of progressing our program. We've recently closed a $20 million Series A round with reputable sort of healthcare institutional investors, and we are going into clinic next year, initiating our phase 1 trials, and then dovetailing that with our proof of concept human study. Of course, it takes a village to build a company, and we have been very deliberate in bringing different voices to the table, not just from a gastrointestinal physiology standpoint, but from polymer chemistry, endocrinology, and drug development. And so what we have here is really a convergence, confluence of decades of understanding of gastrointestinal physiology as it relates to gastric bypass surgery, along with novel material science, which we have understood and learned about from other drugs that have been used in other spaces, to really address this core problem which has plagued us for a long time, which is type 2 diabetes and metabolism. With that, I hand it over.
Thank you for keeping to time. That was really excellent. And wow, gastric bypass in a pill sounds really compelling, doesn't it? And I guess if you're going into trials next year, what would be the patient population that you'll be working with? Is it going to be small to start off with? What's the plan?
Well, obviously, initially we'll be doing phase 1 safety studies in healthy volunteers, but then we plan to go into type 2 diabetic patients for a proof of concept. And it's interesting from a physiology or mechanism standpoint. Gastric bypass surgery is not just used in obese type 2 diabetics, but also lean type 2 diabetics. So if you are to look at how you would phenotype these patients, it's all over the spectrum.
My apologies, I misunderstood that you were going to phase 1 next year. But when you do go to your human trials, what sort of population size would you be looking at, just out of interest? Because obviously it's a big problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, so this will have to be a staged approach, but initially we are planning to look at type 2 diabetic patients.
Okay, great. And congratulations on your funding round. That's a good number to be working with. Excellent. And then we have no questions from the floor. But Ashish, we've got a mention of the paper that you referred to. So thanks for mentioning that. I'm sure that'll get some clicks through. And very best of luck with your work, and big market opportunity, obviously.
Thank you.
Thank you.